There's a story about a man who built a small business in his hometown. It wasn't glamorous. He sold hardware, nuts, bolts, paint. For 15 years, he showed up every day at 6 a.m., kept the shelves tidy, remembered customers' names. But one bad year, recession, supply delays, a few wrong bets, and it all collapsed. His business shuttered, and he was left with debt, disappointment, and questions that echoed at night. People called it failure. He called it reality. The funny thing is that man didn't stop working. He took a job at another store, humbler now, quiet, but over time he saw patterns others didn't. He noticed what customers actually needed. He watched what sold, what sat, what stories people told when they bought a hammer or a light bulb, and eventually, years later, he started a new store, leaner, sharper, more focused. This time it worked. This time it grew. We often tell stories about success like it's a single, shining moment, but that's not how it happens. Success usually hides behind a few dusty doors labeled mistake, wrong turn, or you shouldn't have. It's rarely immediate. And it's almost never clean. The reason failure is so misunderstood is because we expect it to end something. But often, it just begins a new chapter that looks unremarkable at first. It's not glamorous to reflect. It's not thrilling to rebuild, but it's in those quiet, often overlooked spaces that the foundation of real success is poured. Failure teaches us things that books can't. It burns away ego, shows us what actually matters, and reminds us we don't know as much as we thought we did. And that humility, that brutal clarity, is often the missing ingredient in someone's story just before things begin to work. Success after failure doesn't feel like triumph at first. It feels like trying again when you don't want to. It feels like waking up early when no one cares. It feels like doing the right thing when there's no applause. But with time, it compounds. Every humble choice, every lesson absorbed, every new step taken with a little more wisdom than before, that's what builds resilience. That's what builds mastery. We're told to avoid failure, to fear it. But when you trace the stories of people who have done remarkable things, artists, entrepreneurs, athletes, thinkers, there's often a period where they were written off, dismissed, or deeply discouraged. It's not a detour, it's the path. There's no guarantee that every setback will turn into a comeback, but every success story has at least one moment when it easily could have ended in failure and didn't. That moment isn't marked by brilliance or luck. It's usually just someone saying, "Not yet, I'm not done." Failure, when you're honest about it, strips away illusions. It makes you ask better questions. It forces you to listen more carefully, and it opens up a kind of quiet creativity that comfort often suffocates. The trick isn't to avoid failure. It's to build a mindset and system that expects it and is designed to learn from it, to adapt, to return stronger. You won't always get second chances in the exact same form, but the knowledge you carry from the fall makes you more capable when the next opportunity knocks. Sometimes the first version of you isn't the one that wins. Sometimes it's version 2, 0 or 3, 0 that gets it right, but without version 1. 0 failing, the others never exist, so don't resent the setbacks, don't rush to bury the mistakes, sit with them, learn from them. Carry them forward not as shame, but as experience, because the version of you that eventually wins, the one people admire, quote, or write about, will likely be shaped more by the failures they didn't see than the successes they do. Success after failure is not a reward, it's not a twist ending. It's the result of persistence meeting insight, of humility marrying effort, and of time generous, patient time doing what it does best, revealing what was always possible once you've learned what's truly necessary. Failure isn't the end of the story, it's often the beginning of the one worth telling. That idea sounds comforting, even poetic, but for the person in the middle of failure, it feels anything but. When things fall apart, a business closes, a dream dissolves, a relationship ends, a plan backfires, the immediate instinct is to retreat, to label the moment as a final chapter. It's easy to feel like failure has the last word. But the truth is, failure has a strange way of clearing the noise, stripping down pretenses, and leaving only what matters. And in that stripped-down silence, something new often begins, something more honest, more resilient, and more aligned with what you were meant to build all along. The problem is, we're conditioned to measure our lives by straight lines, progress that moves forward and upward. We love beginnings, we love success, we skip over the messy middle. But that middle where nothing is certain, where you feel lost, where you doubt your own decisions, that's where the transformation happens. That's where real stories take shape. The polished stories we admire in hindsight, the comeback tales, the breakthroughs, the epiphanies, they all started somewhere raw, somewhere uncertain, and more often than not, they started in failure. People rarely talk about the part right after a failure. It's quiet, lonely. You don't know who to talk to because you're not sure how to explain what just happened. The version of you that was so confident a few weeks ago now seems naive. You question your judgment, your identity, even your worth. That's the emotional residue of failure. It doesn't just hurt your plans, it hurts your sense of self. But buried in that pain is clarity, because when everything falls apart, the parts that matter most are the ones you notice first. Failure strips away the distractions, the ego, the illusion of control, and what you're left with, however small, however fragile, is real. What begins after failure is rarely flashy. It's not a dramatic restart. It's usually subtle, a different way of thinking, a new kind of question, a change in priorities. Maybe the first time around you chased something because it looked impressive. The second time you might chase something because it feels right. That difference is profound, and it's only visible after things go wrong. There's a kind of wisdom that only shows up when the original plan stops working. That wisdom is earned, not given, and it only comes when you've walked through the disappointment, sat with the consequences, and asked yourself what you missed. Everyone wants the story of success. Few want to live through the story that precedes it, but the irony is that pre-success story, the one filled with mistakes, resets, and silent rebuilding, is what gives success its weight. It's easy to win when you've never lost. But it's meaningful to win after you've failed. That's where the depth comes from. That's what makes the story worth telling. Think of the people whose journeys inspire you. Dig into their lives, and you'll almost always find a chapter where they nearly quit. A season of obscurity, a stretch of time where nothing made sense. What's fascinating is that many of them didn't know at the time that something meaningful was forming. They just kept going, not out of certainty, but out of quiet determination. They learned to work with their doubt, to operate inside their confusion, and over time that practice of showing up, even when the outcome was unclear, became the muscle that pulled them out. Failure, in many ways, is the most honest feedback loop. It doesn't sugarcoat, it doesn't flatter, it tells you where your assumptions were wrong, where your preparation was weak, where your intentions weren't aligned with your actions. That can be hard to hear. But if you're willing to listen, failure tells you the truth, and that truth, if faced with courage, becomes the foundation of a new story, a better one, a story with deeper roots. There's also something deeply humanizing about failure. It reminds you that you're not invincible, that effort doesn't always guarantee reward, but it also reminds you that you're still here, still capable, still learning, and that realization that you've faced something difficult and are still moving creates a quiet confidence. Not the loud kind that needs validation, but the quiet kind that knows its own capacity. That kind of confidence doesn't come from success. It comes from surviving failure and choosing to begin again. The beginning of a story worth telling often doesn't look like a beginning. It looks like rock bottom. It looks like letting go. It looks like stepping away from something you thought you needed, only to discover you were holding onto an illusion. The shift happens gradually, one insight at a time, one conversation at a time, one uncomfortable truth at a time, and before you realize it, the story you're living is different. Not because you planned it perfectly, but because you didn't give up when things stopped going according to plan. In the end, the stories we admire most aren't just about achievement. They're about transformation, and transformation rarely happens when things are easy. It happens when things fall apart, when you're forced to adapt. When you learn to listen to what failure is trying to tell you, those are the stories that matter. Those are the stories that last, not because they ended in success, but because they were forged through the process of becoming. And that process, messy and uncertain as it may be, always begins where most people think it ends. Real growth happens in the quiet aftermath of failure, not during the celebration of success. That's the part no one claps for, no one posts about, no one sees. It's not the headline, it's not the award speech, it's the empty room, the late night thoughts, the long walk with no destination where you're left to sit with what just happened. When the noise fades, when the excitement disappears, when the plans collapse, that's where the growth starts. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's honest. There's no pretending in those moments. You're stripped down to the truth, and it's from that place that something new begins to form. Success is loud. It brings attention, applause, confidence, but it can also bring comfort, which sometimes stalls growth, because when things go right, you don't stop to analyze every detail, you don't question your methods, you don't reflect deeply, you ride the momentum, but failure halts everything. It demands your attention, it asks uncomfortable questions. What did you miss? What assumptions were wrong? What truth were you ignoring? These aren't pleasant questions, but they are essential. They're the soil where growth takes root, and that soil isn't found in victory laps, it's found in the quiet aftermath of things going wrong. There's a stillness after failure that feels like emptiness at first. It feels like waiting for something to return your motivation, your identity, your sense of direction. But that stillness isn't a void, it's a reset. It's a space where reflection becomes possible. When the world around you stops expecting something from you, you begin to ask yourself what you actually want, what actually matters, what you're really willing to fight for, and what you were only chasing because others were. In that stillness, your values get clearer, your voice gets stronger, and your growth becomes real, not performative, not reactive, but rooted in something personal. The aftermath of failure is often misunderstood because it looks unproductive. There are no results to show, no trophies, no milestones, just thought, just doubt, just the long, slow process of understanding. But that process, invisible as it is, shapes everything that comes after. It teaches patience, it sharpens awareness, it humbles you, and it builds something inside that success alone cannot build: resilience. The kind of resilience that doesn't just help you get back up, but helps you get up differently. With more perspective, with more clarity, with more maturity. There's a story behind every person who's reached something meaningful, and in most of those stories, there's a chapter they don't talk about often. A chapter where they lost, where they questioned everything, where they almost walked away. That chapter matters not because it ended in success, but because it shaped the person who could handle success differently. Who wouldn't be defined by it? Who could stay grounded when things got better? Growth born from failure isn't just about becoming more skilled, it's about becoming more centered, more aware of your blind spots, more connected to what really matters. Sometimes the best parts of who we become are shaped in silence, not in front of an audience, but in solitude, not when we're celebrated, but when we're overlooked. That's when we ask deeper questions, that's when we notice things we ignored before. It's in the quiet aftermath of failure that you realize how strong your foundation really is or isn't, and if it's not, that's where you begin rebuilding it. Stronger, wiser, not for show, but for the kind of storms you now know can come. You don't grow much when everything goes right. You perform, you maintain, but real growth requires a challenge. It requires pressure. Not just the pressure to succeed, but the pressure to understand why you didn't. That understanding doesn't come quickly. It comes slowly, through reflection, through discomfort, through facing the parts of yourself that you'd rather not look at. But that's where the progress hides, in the willingness to look, to sit with the silence, to not rush to fix everything, but to absorb the lesson deeply enough that it actually changes you. After failure, you begin to hear your own voice more clearly. The opinions of others still exist, but they carry less weight. Because once you've fallen and realized that you survived, you start to see what truly matters. You realize whose opinions really influence you. You learn who shows up when there's nothing to gain. You learn how to filter noise from insight. These lessons are rarely learned in the bright moments of success. They're discovered in the shadow that follows disappointment. It's easy to associate growth with forward motion, but some of the most important growth is inward. It's not about the next achievement. It's about the depth of understanding, about building the capacity to handle more, not more success, but more complexity. More responsibility, more failure even, because the truth is, failure doesn't just happen once. It recurs, and every time it does, it invites you to grow again, to go deeper, to become more than just someone who succeeds, to become someone who evolves. In the quiet aftermath, you also learn the value of persistence, not the loud, motivational kind, the quiet kind, the kind that shows up when no one's watching, the kind that keeps going even when progress feels invisible. That kind of persistence is forged, not chosen. It's built in the moments when you want to quit but don't, when you don't know what's next but keep showing up anyway. That's not about willpower. It's about faith that what you're learning in silence will serve you in ways you can't yet see. There's a kind of clarity that only comes after the noise of failure fades. It's the clarity of knowing what's real, what's sustainable, what's worth your energy. Success often distracts with options. Failure focuses, it trims the excess, it reveals what's essential. That's the growth most people never see, the ability to navigate with fewer illusions, fewer assumptions, and more truth. Growth that follows failure is rarely celebrated, but it's always earned. It may not come with recognition, it may not lead to a comeback that everyone notices, but it shapes you, it prepares you, it adds depth to your choices. And over time, that quiet growth becomes your advantage, not because others don't have it, but because many never stayed in the silence long enough to find it. The lessons learned in failure compound into wisdom that success alone can't teach. This is the kind of wisdom that doesn't come from books, courses, or advice. It's earned through experience. When things don't go according to plan, when your assumptions collapse, when the outcomes you expected vanish, you're left with raw data about yourself and the world around you. That data is uncomfortable, often painful, but it's real. And over time, as you reflect and adapt, those individual lessons begin to layer on top of each other, forming a kind of intuitive understanding that you carry with you into everything that follows. Success is often mistaken for understanding, but it can actually obscure important details. When things go well, it's easy to assume you were right. It's easy to believe that your strategy was perfect, your decisions flawless, your timing impeccable. But often, success can mask the variables you didn't control. It can inflate confidence without building competence. It can encourage you to double down on a method that may have worked once, but won't work again under different conditions. It doesn't force you to interrogate your process, because the outcome gives the illusion of correctness. Failure does the opposite. It forces a deep audit of your actions, your mindset, your expectations. It demands that you slow down and ask questions, not just about what happened, but why it happened, and if you're honest during that reflection, if you resist the urge to blame others or escape discomfort, you walk away with lessons that stick. These aren't just tactical lessons, they're emotional, psychological, even philosophical. You begin to understand the cost of assumptions, the weight of overconfidence, the danger of rushing, the value of patience, the importance of timing. And because you paid for those lessons with pain, they stay with you. Wisdom isn't the result of success. It's the residue of mistakes that were faced directly. You remember the deal you rushed into because you didn't want to lose momentum. You remember the time you ignored your intuition because you wanted approval. You remember the project you forced because you couldn't accept that something wasn't working. Those memories become internal compasses, subtle but powerful, guiding your choices in the future. You might not even realize you're using that wisdom until you face a similar decision and something inside you hesitates. That hesitation is a signal, a reminder from past failures, telling you to move differently this time. There's also a kind of humility that grows out of failure. When you've fallen short, when you've lost what you thought you'd gained, you become more aware of how fragile outcomes can be. That awareness softens the ego. It makes you listen more carefully. It makes you more cautious with certainty, and that humility doesn't weaken you. It sharpens you. It allows you to see angles others miss, because you're no longer blinded by the belief that you're always right. You start looking for red flags earlier, you ask better questions, you become more thoughtful, more measured, more strategic. Over time, as the failures accumulate and you continue to learn from them, you begin to see patterns. You start noticing how often the root problem isn't external, it's internal. It's not just that the market was wrong, or the client was difficult, or the timing was bad. It's that your expectations were off. Your communication was unclear. Your preparation was incomplete. The beauty of recognizing this is that it puts you back in control. If the problem was you, the solution can be you too, and that mindset creates a feedback loop of improvement. Each failure becomes not just an obstacle, but a mirror showing you where to focus next. Compounded wisdom also changes your relationship with risk. Early on, risk feels binary: success or failure, win or lose. But after going through failure and seeing that you can survive it, your perspective shifts. You start to see risk not as something to avoid, but as something to understand. You learn that risk is not just about the downside, but also about the quality of decision making. You become less reactive, more analytical. You begin weighing long-term consequences, not just short-term gains, and in that shift, you develop a deeper capacity to navigate complexity. Failure also teaches emotional endurance. Not in a superficial, motivational sense, but in a lived, visceral way. You learn what it feels like to wake up the day after everything falls apart. You learn how to function under disappointment, how to keep moving even when the road ahead is unclear. That emotional resilience becomes one of your greatest assets. It keeps you grounded when things go well, and it keeps you moving when things go badly. It gives you a quiet confidence, not that you won't fail again, but that you can handle it if you do. Success alone rarely provides these gifts. It can boost your reputation. It can open doors, but it often skips the deep internal work. Failure doesn't give you applause or recognition, but it gives you something much more valuable over time: an internal library of experience, judgment, and clarity. And the more you add to that library, the more equipped you become to handle situations that others might crumble under. When people talk about someone being wise beyond their years, they're usually referring to someone who has experienced failure early and often, and chosen to learn from it rather than run from it. That choice to reflect, to adapt, to internalize the lesson, is what turns experience into wisdom. And it's what separates those who grow with time from those who simply get older. You also start to realize that the value of failure compounds not just within you, but within your relationships. People trust those who've been through something and emerged honest about it. They sense the depth in your perspective. They see that you're not just guessing or pretending. That credibility can't be manufactured. It has to be earned, and the earning process almost always involves some version of failure. Eventually, you reach a point where your instincts are shaped not just by knowledge, but by lived experience. You start seeing beneath the surface of things. You can detect tension before it explodes. You notice misalignment before it causes problems. You speak less, but when you do, it carries more weight. That is the slow, invisible reward of failure, compounded wisdom. It doesn't show up in your resume. It doesn't appear on social media, but it shows up in your decisions, in your timing, in your calm under pressure, in your ability to see the long game when others are distracted by the short-term noise. And while the process of getting there is rarely enjoyable, the result is invaluable. Because once you've gathered enough of these lessons, you stop being defined by the moments you failed and start being shaped by the insight you earned from them. Success after failure is built on humility, persistence, and long-term perspective. These qualities aren't flashy. They don't show up in highlight reels or in the dramatic moments we often associate with breakthroughs. But they are the quiet foundations that support everything meaningful that comes after failure. When something you've invested in falls apart, an idea, a project, a relationship, it can shake you. It challenges not just your strategy, but your identity. You're forced to question what you believed about yourself and the world. That moment, painful as it is, opens a door not to instant redemption, but to reconstruction. And what you build on the other side depends on whether you choose to embrace humility, persist through uncertainty, and adopt a broader perspective than the one that led you to fall. Humility is the first requirement because failure has a way of humbling even the most confident. It strips away the illusion of invincibility. It forces you to recognize that your understanding was incomplete, that your plan wasn't as airtight as you thought. That realization can either break your ego or awaken your self-awareness. Humility doesn't mean thinking less of yourself. It means being honest about your limitations, about what you don't know, about where you were wrong. That honesty becomes the basis for growth. It allows you to take feedback seriously. It invites you to ask better questions, and it makes space for learning. Without humility, failure becomes something to deny or excuse. With humility, failure becomes a lesson waiting to be understood. Persistence is what keeps the process going. After failure, your motivation doesn't roar at whispers. There's no cheering crowd. There's no immediate reward. It's just you deciding whether or not to try again. And that decision isn't a one-time choice. It's made over and over in small ways, in quiet moments, when doubt creeps in and the results don't come quickly. Persistence isn't about stubbornly doing the same thing. It's about staying committed to the path, even when it bends or breaks. It's about showing up for the next version of your dream, even if the previous one collapsed. It's about choosing progress over perfection and direction over speed. Some days, persistence looks like taking bold action. Other days, it looks like resting without quitting. But in every case, it's what keeps you in motion while others stop. Then there's long-term perspective. Failure has a way of distorting time. It makes the present feel overwhelming, the future uncertain, and the past filled with regrets. But zooming out changes everything. It reminds you that this moment, however intense, is part of a larger story. That a single failure doesn't define a lifetime, that a delay isn't the same as a dead end. Long-term perspective lets you detach from the need for immediate validation. It helps you see the value in patience, in iteration, in slow growth. It also gives you permission to evolve. Maybe the dream you had needs to change. Maybe the route needs to shift. That doesn't mean you failed. It means you're adapting. And that ability to adapt without losing hope is a hallmark of people who eventually succeed. These three qualities, humility, persistence, and long-term perspective, are rarely praised in the early stages of rebuilding. In fact, they often go unnoticed. There's nothing exciting about admitting you were wrong, continuing despite setbacks, or planning years ahead when others are chasing quick wins. But quietly, they build a foundation stronger than anything success alone could create. Because when you succeed after failing, you do so with a clearer mind, a stronger heart, and a more grounded sense of purpose. It's worth noticing how success without failure often leads to a different outcome. It can breed arrogance, complacency, or fear of change. People who have never failed often avoid risk because they don't know how it feels to fall and get back up. They're trapped by the pressure to maintain an image. But those who have failed and risen again carry something deeper. They know how to let go. They know how to rebuild. They know how to stay steady when others panic. That kind of success is durable. It's earned, not inherited. And it lasts longer because it wasn't built solely on momentum. It was built on principles. There's also something powerful about the confidence that emerges from this process. It's not loud or aggressive. It doesn't need to prove anything. It's quiet, calm, and rooted in experience. It comes from knowing you've been through something difficult and came out stronger. From remembering the nights you doubted yourself and still showed up the next day. From understanding that real strength isn't about never falling, but about rising every time you do. That kind of confidence can't be taught. It has to be lived. The journey from failure to success often doesn't look heroic while it's happening. It looks like small decisions, choosing to reflect instead of deflect, choosing to try again when giving up would be easier, choosing to believe in the long term even when the short term is painful. It's a collection of these quiet choices that add up over time. Eventually, they turn into habits. Then those habits turn into character, and that character becomes the engine behind your second or third or 10th attempt at whatever you're building. It's also important to acknowledge that success after failure isn't always about achieving the original goal. Sometimes it's about becoming someone who's capable of something even greater, even if it looks completely different than what you originally imagined. Sometimes the win is internal. It's the growth in mindset, the healing in identity, the wisdom in decision making, and ironically, that internal success often becomes the foundation for external success later on. Because the version of you that can handle uncertainty, stay grounded, and keep going with perspective is the version of you that can navigate almost anything. Along the way, these qualities begin to shape not just how you pursue success, but how you define it. You stop measuring by surface-level metrics and start measuring by depth. by how aligned your actions are with your values, by how resilient you are under pressure, by how clearly you can see the bigger picture when everyone else is chasing quick validation. This shift in definition changes everything. It gives you permission to move differently, to build slower but stronger, to take paths that may not be popular but are deeply right for you. This isn't a path for everyone. It requires more patience, more self-awareness, and more inner work than most are willing to commit to. But for those who do, the rewards go beyond recognition. They show up in the form of peace, integrity, meaning, and a kind of quiet pride that doesn't need to be advertised. You carry that with you silently into every new challenge, and it becomes the most valuable asset you have, not because it guarantees you'll never fail again, but because it ensures you'll never be destroyed by failure again. The most successful version of you often emerges only after earlier versions have failed. That's not a flaw in the process, it is the process. The journey to becoming who you're capable of being almost always involves shedding who you thought you were. The early versions of yourself were built with limited information, shaped by inexperience, and driven by urgency, ambition, or fear. They tried, they stumbled, and in those stumbles they revealed their limits. But each failure held something useful, a clearer understanding, a refined strategy, a sharper instinct. These accumulations of insight become the material with which the next version of you is built. We rarely appreciate the early versions while we're living them. In the moment, they feel like the real thing. We commit fully to them, defend them, and assume they're final, but often they're only drafts. Necessary, flawed, temporary drafts, and like all drafts, their value isn't in perfection, but in what they reveal. Every mistake exposes something that needs to be improved. Every wrong turn teaches something about direction. Every emotional setback becomes a signal about how we process pressure, rejection, or doubt. These lessons can't be skipped. They must be lived through, and it's only by living through them that you create the conditions for a more capable version of yourself to take form. Becoming that next version isn't a clean transition. It usually begins with discomfort. You sense that something isn't working anymore, even if you can't name it yet. The strategies that once got results now stall. The mindset that once gave you confidence now feels brittle. It's disorienting because part of you wants to double down, to fix things by doing more of what used to work. But growth requires letting go, not just of tactics, but of identity. The scariest part of evolving is not the fear of failing again. It's the fear of no longer recognizing yourself, and yet that shedding is essential, because the version of you that will thrive in the next chapter can't be built with the beliefs, habits, and assumptions of the previous one. This transformation doesn't happen in a single moment. It unfolds gradually, often invisibly. It's in the books you're suddenly drawn to, the conversations that shift your thinking, the questions you start asking yourself late at night. Sometimes it's triggered by a major failure, other times by a slow accumulation of subtle misalignments that finally demand change. But once the shift begins, the old version of you starts to feel like a costume, familiar but no longer fitting. You begin to make different choices, not because someone told you to, but because the old ones no longer make sense. And without realizing it, you start constructing a new version of yourself, not to impress anyone, but because you've outgrown the old one. There's something deeply powerful about this cycle, the realization that who you are today isn't fixed, and that failure isn't a sign you're broken. It's a sign that you've reached the edge of your current capabilities. And reaching that edge is necessary if you want to expand them. The failure of the earlier version makes room for something more refined. You learn where your ego got in the way, where your vision lacked depth, where your priorities were misaligned, and in that awareness you start choosing differently, with more thought, more maturity, more patience. That's not just growth, that's evolution, and it doesn't come from success alone. It comes from standing in the ruins of your previous efforts and building again, brick by brick, with better materials. This evolution isn't just internal. It starts to show up in how you lead, how you work, how you relate to others. The successful version of you isn't just more competent, it's more centered, less reactive, more focused on the long term. You're no longer trying to prove something, you're building something. The desperation that used to fuel you gets replaced by discipline. The insecurity that once pushed you becomes replaced by a quiet confidence earned through trial. You begin to understand that failure wasn't a deviation from the path. It was the path. And without it, the depth of understanding you now hold wouldn't exist. One of the most overlooked parts of this process is how the failures of your past versions equip you to help others. Because you've failed, you have empathy. Because you've changed, you have perspective. You know what it's like to feel stuck, to feel lost, to wonder if the effort is worth it. And because you've rebuilt yourself, you carry that experience forward in a way that others can feel. It shows in your decisions, in your advice, in your presence. That kind of depth can't be taught in theory. It has to be lived, and it becomes one of your greatest assets. You also become less afraid of future failures, not because you believe you're immune, but because you trust your ability to recover. You've seen yourself break and rebuild. You know the version of you that exists now is not the final one, and that knowledge gives you freedom. You're no longer paralyzed by the idea that you have to get everything right the first time. You know that growth is iterative, that the next level of success will likely demand another version of you, and when that time comes, you'll let go of who you are today, just like you let go of who you were before. There's beauty in knowing you are unfinished, that your best work, your best thinking, your best decisions are still ahead, and that the failures behind you weren't signs of weakness. They were necessary stages of becoming. You start to view each previous version of yourself with more compassion. You stop cringing at who you were and start appreciating how far you've come. Even the mistakes have value now, because they carried the lessons that shaped your evolution. And when you look ahead, you do so not with fear, but with curiosity, wondering who you might become next, knowing that whoever that is will be shaped not by perfection, but by persistence through imperfection. This mindset changes the way you set goals, take risks, and navigate uncertainty. You begin to see life not as a linear climb, but as a series of reinventions. Each chapter requires a different strength, a different skill, a different version of you. And the more comfortable you become with that process, the more effective you become over time. You're not chasing a static idea of success anymore. You're building capacity, and capacity is what sustains you when things go wrong, when plans change, when the world shifts. The most successful version of you is rarely the one who started the journey. It's the one who learned how to continue it regardless of how many times they had to start over.